Hello and welcome to Speed Bumps with Charlie Kimball. I am your host, Charlie Kimball, and I am excited about today's guest for episode number 2. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be dazzled because we are about to embark on a journey through the exhilarating worlds of racing, dancing, and speed bumps with none other than my friend James Hinchcliffe. From his early days racing karts in Canada to climbing the ranks of open-wheel racing, James has shown he's a true speed enthusiast on the racetrack. James has won 6 NTT IndyCar Series races over his career, sat on pole once at just a little race known as the Indianapolis 500. He was second in the 2010 Indy Lights Championship, receiving the Greg Moore Legacy Award, an award I know is close to his heart and his red gloves. In 2011, he was named Rookie of the Year in the IndyCar Series and received the Tony Renna Rising Star Award. But his talents extend far beyond the racetrack. He's a true Renaissance man, wowing audience with his smooth moves and infectious charisma, both on and off the dance floor, as the runner-up on what I think is probably his greatest achievement in life, runner-up on the 23rd season of Dancing with the Stars. Off track, he's a connoisseur of bourbon, guitars, and antique lighters, though whether he can play any of those guitars continues to remain a mystery. You may recognize his voice and lovely face from the NBC Sports coverage of the IndyCar Series, where he's been lending his expertise and enthusiasm as a commentator since 2022, as well as a host of his very own podcast, Off Track with Hinch and Rossi. So buckle up and join us in extending a warm welcome to none other than the mayor of Hinchtown himself, James Hinchcliffe. James, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, bud. And I appreciate the very thorough and rather poetic intro.
Well, you know, it's amazing what ChatGPT will do these days. It really makes you sound a lot smarter than you are. But I kind of want to start with the fact your and my IndyCar careers really lay over the top of each other. And I think it goes back all the way to a video where you and I often got mistaken, still do, in fact. In fact, I have 3 photos here on my desk asking for an autograph from fans that are photos of you, not me. So we often get mistaken for each other. There's a great video where you and J.R. Hildebrand and myself did a YouTube video of how to decipher which IndyCar driver you're talking to. And I will link that in the show notes so people can go back and dive deep, because once things are on the internet, they never die. But you and I have both around 160 IndyCar starts. I've got 157. You have 161. Our first IndyCar race was within a month of each other back in 2011. And our last IndyCar race, where you and I both competed, was the same, the 2021 Long Beach Grand Prix. So our careers have mirrored each other. We've known each other a long time. What stands out to you over these now probably, God, it feels like 2 decades worth of memories of us together?
Oh, man. I mean, for me, it goes right back to when it started, honestly. Like, you and I both started competing in Indy Lights together back in 2009. So as much as our Indy car careers overlapped, our Indy Lights careers overlapped, our go-karting careers overlapped in the 80cc shifter categories, back in the day, before you decided to go be fancy over in Europe. But no, for me, it's honestly those early days of being, poor starving lights drivers and wannabe professional racers, and both moved to Indianapolis. You and Kathleen, I think I've been part of the move to most of your domiciles together over the years. I've certainly drank at all of them. So yeah, for me, some of my favorite memories, man, are just going back to kind of how it all started with us back in 09.
I do remember actually helping you talking about moving, getting a call from you on one Black Friday right after Thanksgiving and being like, what are you doing? Not a whole lot. I'm, at our place downtown. And you going, yeah, I went shopping and I need some help. I said, yeah, sure. What's up? And he goes, well, just come to the garage, my condo. I got a TV.
Yeah.
And you had bought a TV that was like, I don't know, as tall as Stephen Wilson. It was
Yeah.
ginormous. And you said, "Oh, I need some help getting it into the elevator and up to my place." And I believe what you told me was when you're in a big box store looking at a TV, it's hard to tell relative sizes. And
Yeah.
you were standing and looking at one, but then you sidestepped a couple bigger to the left, right?
Yeah, yeah. I had scoped it out online because like I don't like shopping in general. So Black Friday shopping is like the bane of my existence. But I really needed a TV. I just moved into this joint, and so I like specced out. I want to say it was a. I think I specced out a 60-inch TV or something, and I was like, okay, I know exactly what store it is. I know they've got them there. I know I know how much it is. I'm just gonna walk in, walk straight to that TV, grab it, and get the hell out as quick as I could. And I walked in there and I was standing there and yeah, I was looking at it. I'm like, yeah, this is really nice. But the one right next to it's even nicer. And it was a 70-inch TV. So I just inadvertently, accidentally upgraded. And yeah, I hadn't really done all the measurements on how I was going to get it A, into the car, B, into the condo, or C, up into the spot it was supposed to. But we figured it out.
Yeah, yeah, we got it done, and there were a couple of hinge down, hammer downs, or a couple of beers and a couple of bourbons along the way, and it was square enough that I don't think anyone ever complained, did they?
Hey, man, that's why they call you the brain.
And by they you mean me, right? Because like no one else really does. It's just
Correct.
yeah, yeah, okay,
Correct.
fair enough.
The proverbial they. Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, well, maybe we should get into some more like serious conversation rather than buying much too big a TV for places we're living. Um, we've trained together, right? We have been in the same gym, Pit Fit with Jim Leo there in Indianapolis, for seems like 15 years now, probably 15, 16, even more. But what have you noticed, and your perspective, as an athlete and a driver with type 1 diabetes, how I handle fitness, how I handle training, how I handle competition, how I handle traveling is a little different than maybe some of the other drivers because of that freeloading pancreas I have along for the ride. Um, you've seen it all, right? Like I said, we've been on vacation together, we've been at the racetrack, we've bumped wheels at the racetrack. We've trained in the gym together. Blood, sweat, and tears, it feels like in the gym. So, what's your view of having competed with me on the track as an athlete with type 1? And has it changed your view on how you competed and then in the gym and on through travels as well?
Yeah, well, look, I'll cover those in reverse order. The first thing for me was just because you were really the first, type 1 diabetic that I interacted with and got to know on a personal level, like you say, hung out together, traveled together, all that sort of stuff. And kind of just seeing how involved it was. Because you got to remember, this is back before, there was apps on phones and wireless doohickeys and, you know, um, you having to just every meal be conscious about, hey, I'm just gonna check my blood sugar and then I gotta take my insulin and whatever, whatever. And I remember thinking like, man, that's like it takes such a discipline and such an understand. You really have to understand what it is you're dealing with. It's kind of like, we talk about drivers, right? Drivers can drive a car fast, right? But if they don't understand how the car works, they're never going to be as good as the driver that really gets the big picture, right? So for you, it was always impressive that like I have subsequently met and got to know other type 1 diabetics, and some of them are just kind of a little more ballparky, I guess is the way I would put it. But with you, and it's no surprise knowing you and how your mind works, like you were very precise. You had all the information. You would educate me on stuff if I had a question, and you knew the proper, detailed, actual answers. So it was just kind of fascinating to see kind of how you managed it just a day to day. And then, then we step forward into the training side. So next we're in the gym. And once again, you've just got to be that much more cognizant of, some other element of your body, right? When you're training, when you're an athlete, you're very in tune with your body. You know when you're in trouble, when you've got a little bit left in the tank, you're just very tuned into those sensations. again, you had to take it that extra level and kind of manage this other thing that the rest of us didn't. And if anything, learning about how diet affected, what you were dealing with, it kind of made me actually think a little bit more, because I learned a lot from you about diet and what it does to blood sugar and things like that. And obviously that has an effect on how your body burns energy and things like that. So the training side, again, I just felt like you had that extra layer you had to cope with, but you did it so like thoroughly and intensely, while simultaneously almost kind of helping me out understand more about my body, which was kind of cool. And then, you get into the car side of things, the actual competing. And it's funny because, you think about a type 1 diabetic in golf or basketball, or, pick another sport, right? And if they don't happen to be as diligent as you, or they get caught off guard or something, oh, you get a bit lightheaded, you sit down, you drink your orange juice, you have a Snickers bar, whatever, and off you go. And I remember at the time people being like, oh, but what if he has like an episode in the race car that's very dangerous and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, you guys haven't really met Charlie, have you? Like there will be no episodes. That part I'm very confident about. But again, like, you embrace technology in a way. You had your readout taped or velcroed to your steering wheel. Again, before all this stuff was microscopic and cool, you took some, in hindsight, looking back on it now, kind of rudimentary devices and technology, but incorporated it into what you were doing. So it was always really impressive, man. It was one of those things where, like, there's that saying that things happen to people that can handle it. Well, like, I could not think of another person who could have handled that situation in your chosen career path better than you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I always used to joke that through the high tech science of Velcro was how I got my blood sugar on my steering wheel, right? Like, you're talking about these high
Yeah.
end biomedical devices with algorithms and polymers and this wire floating in my body and transmitting wirelessly to this display that I then just Velcroed to the steering wheel. And I don't know if you ever knew this, but I can't remember which season it was that we raced with each other, against each other in Indy Lights, but it was one year we were racing at Milwaukee and I had a crash in practice.
Milwaukee. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that story.
And I had to add an additional layer of security to my display because when I crashed, I backed into the wall. The Velcro wasn't strong enough to hold a 40G hit into a concrete barrier. And so it exited stage right over my shoulder. And so I was like, okay, next time, taught me a couple lessons. I need a spare in case anything ever goes wrong with my readout. B, let's use some tie wraps and add some plastic to that. And C, I realized how strong those devices were, and they're super over engineered, a lot like race cars.
Didn't you find it in between the barrier and the safer, like the wall and the safer barrier?
Yeah, my dad and I at the end of the day were like, all right, it's quite on track. I don't know, let's go see if we can find it. This is a long shot. Maybe we can send the pieces back to the manufacturer and they can learn something, right? So we're walking along and like there were some leaves, I think some, just brown leaves between the safer barrier and the concrete wall. And I look down and I go, that looks, so I like lean in, right? My dad's holding my feet like a kid, dipping me in, right? I pull it out and it's just flashing like signal lost. Like it was working totally fine, like no problem. Just like, where'd Charlie go? Like I'm not
Yeah.
getting a reading from the sensor. So it was interesting. You start with rudimentary, and it's like, yeah, let's Velcro it, and then you learn some lessons really quickly. Um, and as those lessons became more natural, like you talk about the nutrition piece, that was something that I felt fortunate, I think, as an athlete, growing up when I was diagnosed, I never thought, oh, okay, I've got to cut out smoking. I've got to cut out regular Cokes. I've got to cut out
Right.
all this other stuff. Oh, I've got to get more active so that I keep my body healthier for longer. It was almost a natural progression into the discipline of it, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, how many hours would you estimate you have spent training over your lifetime as a professional athlete?
I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, a lot, quite a
Right.
lot.
And I mean, there were times, especially when we were in Indy Lights, training to become and training for that opportunity to get in an Indy car. I mean, we didn't have a whole lot of other commitments. And I remember we'd go to the gym in the morning and then like we'd go get lunch and then be like, well, what do you want to do this afternoon? I don't know. You want to go back to the gym? Like we would just
Yeah, it was
do,
great. It was
you know,
nice. It was a really nice existence.
and it was spoiled. Like it was wasted on us because we were like, oh, it's like, I just want to be an IndyCar driver. And now it's like, I just want to
Yeah,
have that time to be able to choose to go to the gym twice a day if I wanted.
yeah, yeah.
Now,
Then you get a real job and it's all downhill.
life gets way harder when you have a real job. It is very, very interesting. Okay, so title of the podcast is speed bumps. We're going to talk about speed bumps. The sort of theory and reasoning behind calling it speed bumps and what speed bumps are is they're not roadblocks, right? They don't stop you continuing down the road, but they slow you down. Sometimes they put you a little off track. Sometimes the faster you hit them, the better they go. Sometimes they sneak up on you and you don't know they're there. So I want to talk about speed bumps in your life. And first, I want to talk about ones that a lot of people watched, and a lot of people watched you work your way across it and continue on down that road or that racetrack in this case. And that's
My
the
cha-cha on Dancing with the Stars. Yeah, I know.
well,
It was
yeah,
terrible.
you know,
Still gives me nightmares.
but but it leads us to that. Right, this speed bump leads us to that. And I'm talking about when you had the suspension failure in, I believe it was the Monday practice, the final practice before carb day of the Indianapolis 500. And I'm hoping we have some audience members here who aren't big race fans, aren't big Indy 500 fans. And the way the month lays out for them, I'll do a little quick education. But there's a week of practice, weekend of qualifying, one final practice on Monday, and then carb day, not carbohydrates, despite how many people in the type 1 diabetes want to make it about carbohydrates and carb loading for the race. It's back when race cars had carburetors, last chance to tune those carburetors before race day. Saturday, the day we're usually practicing and qualifying right before a race, we're not even at the racetrack. We go on a parade and a driver's meeting and sponsor commitments, and then the Indianapolis 500 miles on Memorial Day Sunday. Now, it was that Monday practice, final practice before, as drivers, we would disappear and do media commitments. The mechanics would tear the cars all apart, get them ready for a 500 mile, the biggest race of the year. And I remember this moment actually. I've thought back to it a lot actually over the years. I was sitting in the race car and we weren't on track. We'd come in to make a change and it went yellow. And um, the spotter says, impact Hinchcliffe in turn 3. And and he goes, yeah, it didn't look that bad. And my engineer at the time goes, yep, all right, well, let's focus on what we're doing here. And the way he said it made me think, okay, maybe that was that bad. Because that as drivers, right, everyone tries to do this insulation. They try to wrap us in bubble wrap and keep our heads in the game. How much do you remember about that day? And at any point, if you're like, yeah, I don't want to talk about that, we move on. But this is, to me, I think one of the best examples of something that you could not have predicted. Obviously, you never saw coming, and yet I felt like you as a person came out stronger and better because of it. At least as my friend, I feel like you have overcome that, and then that just launched you to the upper stratosphere.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, I've said kind of all along that it's, even though it sounds weird and bizarre, in a lot of ways, that accident was the best thing that's ever happened to me. Um, and, you ask about the memories from that day, they're a bit foggy. Up to the accident, I'm pretty good. My memory sort of checks out about 30 seconds before the accident happened. And I remember waking up in hospital a few hours later, um, thinking, okay, well, my last memory, I was driving an Indy car and I blinked and I'm now staring up at a bunch of lights with a bunch of concerned looking people and a tube down my throat and a neck brace. And I'm like, all right, so something's gone wrong here. This is not good. Suboptimal, as we like to say. Um, and yeah, from there, honestly, the next few days are pretty foggy. I've got memories of things, people coming to visit, conversations with doctors, removing a catheter. It was nice in my brain to make sure I remembered that one. That was cool. But no, I mean, luckily, I don't remember anything
Something
from
you
the
don't want to ever
accident.
have to
So
do again, I hope.
no, for sure.
Okay. Well, and so for people who haven't seen it, suspension failed. James hit the wall. That suspension then entered what we refer to as the safety cell, the cockpit of the car, the tub, the chassis, through the carbon fiber, through James, and is like I think you may be the only human shish kebab I've ever met.
Well, I hope so. I can't imagine there's too many of us.
And you gotta like, I mean, it was a fairly serious accident, and in fact, I think you talked earlier about, you know, hard things don't happen to people who can't handle them, in reference to me being able to overcome the challenge of diabetes. I think that your accident happened on the one day, the one place where it would mean you're still able to talk to me here today. Because the trauma surgeon who literally wrote the formula and wrote the book on fluid replacement was at the racetrack that day, rode in the ambulance to Methodist Hospital, got the trauma center ready for you, and was able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Um, like, I know this is like a real cerebral thought, but what's your thought on had how many factors have to be different for the outcome to be like completely upside down?
Yeah, it's one of those things, Charlie, where, without getting too technical into how it happened, the cause of the accident was a very rare failure. I've never seen it in my career. I've had mechanics that had told me in 25 years of working on IndyCar, they'd never seen that part fail. But cars hit the wall all the time, and 99.999% of times they don't get shish kebabbed. So basically, there was this perfect storm of things. The part had to break at just the right angle. I had to hit the wall just so, with just the right part, all these things, right? To have the worst possible luck to have the accident happen the way it did. But it's literally a factor of 10 things had to happen just so for me to survive that accident basically unscathed down the road, to have no lasting real issues because of, as you mentioned, the proximity to the closest trauma center, the personnel that happened to be on staff that day, the angle that it went in, the height that it went in, a couple millimeters in either direction, it would have been game over. Any other racetrack, it would have taken too long to get to the hospital without having blood to fill me back up. So game over. Um, Honestly, I was so lucky, as unlucky as it was to happen and the way it happened. I was so lucky with a million different things. And yeah, that kind of experience makes you kind of look at the bigger world a little bit, and kind of put some things in a perspective for you, certainly.
And what was your mindset? I mean, I heard a story and I don't remember how accurate it was, but one of the first things, you had a breathing tube in, so you couldn't speak, and you asked for a notepad and you asked, uh, can I race? Or when can I get back in the car? Does that speak to your mindset of recovery? And, you had this goal to get healthy and get strong, and so you weren't ever really looking backwards. It was all about what was in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, look, and you can speak to it, man. Like you got injured in the car once and had to miss a race, and I think any driver, any competitor, any athlete, right? They just want to get back into the game as quickly as possible. And racing drivers are especially adept at ignoring what hurt them in the first place, and putting it behind you to get back into a race car. Um, so for me, yeah, I mean, I didn't look back on my accident at all from the day that it happened. In the in the sense of like I watched the video 1,000 times. I quizzed every doctor. I interviewed everybody on the safety team because I wanted to know what happened. I had a weird, like, morbid curiosity about the accident itself. But even when I was doing that, I sort of disassociated me from the stories I was hearing, right? And so I think I was helped out
Right.
tremendously by the fact that I have no actual memory of the accident. I don't remember getting stabbed. I don't remember getting pulled off of a metal rod. I don't remember all the most unpleasant parts. All the rehab and recovery stuff, sure, but the
Right.
accident itself, my brain never associated it with a race car, with the racetrack. I kind of told myself I had a car accident, and so there was never any
Right.
fear or negative emotion tied to getting back in the car. And yeah, like you said, from the third question I asked when I woke up in hospital was, when can I get back in the car?
Yeah, that's incredible, and I think you're right. There is this for racing drivers, especially, but for a lot of athletes, right? There's this dissociation between performance, right? If you get hurt on the football field, right? We've all talked to football players, and it's one of the great things about being athletes in Indianapolis. You get to move in some really cool circles and have some really cool conversations. You disassociate that, be like, oh, like you said, it was an accident, so it won't happen again, right? I had no control over that, and for you, I can see how you would interview the safety team and be like, well, what'd you do to the driver then? Right? Not what'd you do to James or me, but like, how did the driver recover from this? Right? Because the driver is
Right.
different than who was asking the questions. And I think that's an important viewpoint for people to think about it. It's like, okay, yeah, this happened, and you wanted to learn everything you could about it to help other drivers and help yourself and clear up whatever lingering challenges there were from that. But then you were straight into rehab as well. And how long was it between that accident, obviously in May, to driving a race car again, to then racing and competing again?
So it was about 4 months, almost to the day, before I could get back in a car. And that unfortunately was right at the end of the season. So I wasn't fit enough to be, thrust back into a race weekend. I was just on the brink of healthy enough to go do a test day kind of thing. So I missed the whole rest of that year. So, May was the accident. September, end of September, I got back into a car. Um, and then it would have been March was the next time that I got to go actually, race again in the heat of competition.
And then you come back from that and dramatically exercise your demons the following year at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, um, in qualifying for the Indy 500. You put it on pole. How did that feel, looking back at the track that had tried to kill you just 12 months earlier?
It was very cool, man, because, you know, even though I was the guy sitting in the car, right? Racing's a team sport, as you know, as a lot of people are learning, but maybe some still don't understand. It's not an individual sport, it really is a team sport. And it's a family. A race team is a family at the end of the day. And that family lost a brother for the rest of the season. Their guy got hurt. And in the same way, where if you're on a stick and ball sports team and one of your guys goes down, like, that hurts. You miss that guy. You want that guy to get back in the game. And so, yeah, fine. I was the one that was in hospital, but the whole team gets affected by that, right? That has an impact on every member of that team. So we come back a year later to Indy, and obviously the 500 is the biggest deal for us, and qualifying in Indy is super unique in the sport, and it's one of the coolest weekends of the year. It's one of the most thrilling things that drivers get to do, and there's a huge amount of pride that goes along with being quick in qualifying in Indy. And not just for the driver. That car has to be absolutely perfectly built and perfectly set up, and so that team element really comes back to it again. And when I came back, it was almost identical crew, like almost, I think I had maybe one crew change on let's say a 12-person crew, 15-person crew on that car. So it was all the same people that had lived through all that, drama and scariness and, fear of what the outcome was going to be for me, all that stuff a year prior. We came back and proved that not only were we able to go out and still do it, we went out there and did it better than anybody. And I think for just that, the whole group, that whole collective, to be able to share that moment together after living through the moment that we did a year before makes that moment, what, like a pole at Indy would be a career highlight anyway, but like this is kind of one of those life moments that you remember, like birth of your first child or wedding day, like it's kind of up there with those sorts of things for me because it was just this really cool emotional moment that we all got to share, again with a group that had been through a lot in the previous 12 months.
And knowing race mechanics as I do, I can imagine it felt like for both you and them exercising a lot of demons. 12 months later, I'm sure some of them or all of them felt some personal responsibility for what was a freak failure, for essentially for you ending up in the hospital. I've heard it with mechanics. If something breaks, they're like, oh man, like I feel really badly, like as badly as you or I do if we had an accident and they have to fix the car, right? Like it is a team. And so that moment, I can only imagine how it just felt like a weight lifted off all of you.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and you sort of said it. These mechanics, the guys and girls that work on these race cars have a tremendous amount of pride in what they do. And kind of going back to that team sport, story, you want to talk about teamwork. My life is in their hands. The people building this car, and if it does break, and it is an issue with like they take that responsibility very seriously. Because they are in control of my life, and you got to trust your teammates. Really, like that's a team sport right there. Don't tell me that's an individual sport. That's a team sport. And yeah, so I think you're right. I think the pride that came from not just showing back up and competing, but showing back up and building the fastest car, setting up the fastest car, driving the fastest car together. We all did our job that day better than anybody, and that's something that you can be really proud of.
Absolutely. And you fast forward a little bit beyond that, and the final exorcism is watching you on Dancing with the Stars. I got a great photo of you and I on that final night. You finished second on the podium. You know what they say about second place, James, but it it was really interesting because
I
your
do.
doctor said your body, with all the scar tissue and all the damage that you had in your hips and your legs, your body should not move like that. And the whole country got to see you on national TV, for week in, week out, moving and telling your story through, frankly, a really creative outlet, and something that I have a lot of respect for because I have two left feet. I can't dance. Despite what my wife may lie to you about that, I can't dance. So being able to see you continue that growth and sort of really put an exclamation point of, okay, James is back, and James, you know, your enthusiasm, your charisma, the whole country got to see that. What did that feel like to be on, pardon the pun, on that big a stage here? And I can't believe that's the first pun I've gotten to today.
Yeah, fair enough. That is, you're under your quota. Yeah, no, honestly, that's one of those things that, when I say that the accident was in a lot of ways the best thing that ever happened to me, that's one of the things that really comes out of that. There was a 0% chance I would have done that show before the accident. After the accident, a lot of people would ask, hey, did it change you at all? And my answer would always be, well, professionally, no. Professionally, I would still get in the car. I would take the same risks. I would go for the same gap. Nothing changed behind the wheel. But personally, it changed me quite a bit. And it kind of freed me a little bit. When you nearly lose everything, you appreciate anything a little bit more. And so that opportunity, the things that would have scared me about it beforehand, I realized I'm like, that's not scary. I know what scary is. That's not scary. And so I was, and I became a bit of a yes man because you never know, you never know what tomorrow's going to hold, right? And so I used to be really good at being like, I'll do that next time, or I'll do that. We'll go on that trip next year, or like one of those guys. And I quickly turned into a yeah, let's do it all because who knows. And that was a very interesting experience. I gained an incredible appreciation for the art form and the people that, especially ones that work on that show, and how that show operates. And um, it was, yeah, it was terrifying at times, but that's kind of what made it fun. And the fact that I could move that way is just credit to my surgeon's good handiwork. So he didn't believe it was possible, but that's just he is underestimating himself, I think.
Well, and working behind the scenes on that show and seeing how TV was made, did that help you? Did that change how, when you got the opportunity to call IndyCar races and add your analysis to the NBC broadcast team, do you feel like you were better prepared for that role, knowing how a big TV production ran? And I know scripted or reality TV is different than live sports. It's very different, but seeing some of how that sausage was made, so to speak, did that help you when you stepped into the broadcast booth?
It's a really interesting question, and the answer might surprise you, because there's an important word that you said there, which was, a live reality show or a live sports broadcast. Everything after the word live is very different, but the live element is actually very important. Broadcasting was always something that I had in the back of my mind. I wanted to try because I got this crazy opportunity when I was young, before you and I started racing lights together and before we got to IndyCar, to try a little bit of it. And it was always kind of in the back of my head that that's what I wanted to do when I decided to hang up the helmet. But when I got to that point at the end of 21, one of the big things that I worried about was missing the rush, was missing being part of a team, and was missing that adrenaline rush that you get from competition in general, but then obviously specifically driving race cars on the limit. And what the earlier broadcast experience really hadn't exposed me to, for various reasons, but the show kind of did, was that pulling off a live broadcast is a rush. It's not turn one at the Indy 500 rush, but when you know that there are millions of people watching, there are no redos, there are not, you can't do another take. What you say is out there forever. What you do is out there forever. How you react to something is out there forever. There is a there is a bit of a rush that comes from that. That red light comes out, they count down 3, 2, 1, and you're like, hey, for the next 2 hours, like, we're on. And we're a team. The broadcast team, the production team, what it takes to put on a broadcast is unbelievable. And you know this, Charlie. You're working in the space too. You work with the same people I do. You know everything that goes into it. And so I experienced that on Dancing with the Stars as well. I mean, watching how the set people would rebuild different sets in commercial breaks, and seeing how the costume designers had to design these costumes that you could still dance in, but were super, elaborate and intricate, and seeing how the director had to design the camera moves for each individual dance, and how you had to plan which couples danced in which order based on which cameras were being used and which sets were being built. How it all came together in a 2 hour live show was baffling to me. But again, it was this huge team. And so as I sat there wrestling with hey, these are the things I'm really going to miss about racing IndyCar, I realized that this opportunity I had was actually going to kind of check some of those boxes. So yes, it sort of did make it a little bit easier, and prepare me a little bit for the kind of life I was getting myself into.
Well, fantastic. And I mean, you do a great job on the broadcast, but you talk about that, the risk involved or the pressure, I guess, that privilege of being able to perform and be on with a team that you trust and rely on. When you ask for a replay of something that happened on track that you've been talking to, they've got it, they load it, they play it. you're right. Being in that same space, working with a lot of those same people, it's so impressive that, like, I mean, when you watch it, you go, "Oh yeah, that was a great race." You don't think that was a great race, and hundreds of people did their jobs perfectly, so that all you were thinking was that was a great race, not why is that camera looking at the wrong way or whatever. It really is an incredible team piece on the production. And I saw that pressure recently. I saw you rehearsing for a stand up at the intro of a show, and I
Yeah.
think it was a fairly intense conversation about some news that was happening in racing, and the only other time I've seen you close to that nervous, or seen that same level of pressure,
I know where you're going with this.
was right before my wedding and my marriage ceremony to my wife Kathleen. You officiated our wedding. You had to get additionally ordained. I guess being a mayor of an online made-up town wasn't good enough for the government, but
Nor
you
should it be.
you you rehearsing for that wedding ceremony was the most stressed and most nervous I've ever seen you.
Charlie, I got to be honest with you, man. That may be the most nervous I have ever been in my entire life. And when you consider the things that I've done in my life, I've raced cars, I've crashed cars, I've jumped out of planes, I've been on national television dancing, wearing guy liner and spandex. I've done all sorts of crazy things. That is probably still the most terrified, stressed, anxious, and nervous I have ever been.
Well, we still really appreciate you overcoming that anxiety, and it was a great ceremony. And Kathleen and I are still happily married, coming up on 10 years since that happened. So, thank you very much for that. We got one last question for you. So we saw the big crash, right? Your crash, your accident, your recovery from that has been well publicized as a speed bump that you've overcome. Have there been any, what I'm going to call silent speed bumps that people don't know about, that, if it's crisis of conscience or challenges that people haven't seen, that you're comfortable sharing, that, maybe our audience can take away and go, okay, not everyone sees this hard time I'm going through, but when I come through it, it's all going to be worth it.
For sure, man. I mean, you know what this sport is like, right? And I've never competed in other sports. I assume there are similar stories through anybody that went into, the pro athlete route in life. Um, but certainly some of the early days, I think, were some of the toughest because there's so much outside of your control. You are trying to make a name for yourself. The sport is so expensive. It's so hard to find money at that point. Your family is sacrificing everything, and you don't know if it's ever going to be for any reason, if it's ever going to be worthwhile, if it's going to come to anything. There were some really dark days in the days leading up to getting that shot. And then even when I got that shot, I got an IndyCar test. They're like, "Yeah, we love you. Let's sign you." But then they didn't have a sponsor. And you mentioned at the top of the show how our IndyCar debuts were 1 month apart. Well, it's because I hadn't found a sponsor and I thought my career was over. And then magically we found one and we made it to the next race, kind of thing. So um, days like that for sure were tough. And then there's always stuff in your personal life that you struggle with. I mean, for me, losing my dad a few years ago was a really big deal and had a tremendous impact on me. Um, and I'd be lying if I said that it didn't play a part in the decision to kind of step back from racing full time. And there were days and nights through that process that people won't know about and aren't on TV and aren't on social media. But you sit there sometimes. If anyone that's lost a loved one will know, it's these moments you're like, I don't know how I'm ever going to get through this. And then you realize that as bad as it hurts in those moments, you're not the first one to have gone through this, and the rest of the world actually managed to come out the other side okay. And then you kind of stop thinking emotionally and start thinking rationally again. But yeah, man, there's always all sorts of stuff. It's never easy in this business, but it's not easy in this world. Everybody has their own battles and challenges that they have to fight, kind of like you say, silently. Those silent speed bumps.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think one of the perspectives that I've always found comforting in losing a loved one, and you and I have had a lot of conversations that will stay, that are between us and will stay between us over the years about these things, um, as should be with any good friends, is that how lucky are we that we hurt so much when we lose someone because we got to love them so much and spend so many worthwhile
100%.
moments with them. Um, time and space and being that close for that long. It 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 puts the roots pretty deep. So I appreciate you sharing your story. So I'm going to try and make it a tradition here on the Speed Bumps podcast. We're going to finish out with 3 rapid fire questions. First one coming at you, James. What's the best advice you've ever had, and who was it from?
Best advice I ever got was actually from my childhood hero, Greg Moore, who was a driver, and he was very tragically killed in a racing accident back in '99. But when I was a snot-nosed kid, I went to the IndyCar race in Toronto. I got the chance to meet him, trying to get his autograph. And my sister, thank God, was with me because I just was staring up at this guy like he was a god. I couldn't get 2 words out. But my sister was like, "Oh, my brother here's a go-karter. He wants to be a driver one day. Do you have any advice for him?" And he just said, "Yeah, man, just don't give up. It's a tough world and it's a tough gig, but just don't give up." And it sounded so like throwaway and just like yeah, that's just his preloaded answer for any time someone asks him something and he's got no time to respond. But then I started going through my life and through my career, and I realized that he was absolutely right. I mean, you realize that the opportunities in this sport can be so few and far between, but they go to the people that kept digging, kept hustling. We're always there. We're always ready. And as long as you don't give up, eventually that opportunity is going to come. Now, then it's up to you to execute on that opportunity, right? That's not just a given that you're going to make it, but it's about being there for those chances when they come. And so I give every young driver that asks me that question the same answer that I got from Greg.
Well, I love that, and yeah, always remember Greg with your red gloves, and red gloves rule. So, all right, number 2 coming at you. What is one road car? We're car guys racing. That you would one road car you'd love to have in your garage, and do you have it yet? And what's your plan to get it if you don't?
Well, I mean, if we're talking like all time, no rules,
Yeah.
my one of my first car loves was the McLaren F1. I just love that it was a center seat. I love that it's still a 6-speed gearbox. The car, it looks great. It sounds great. Pretty sure I'll never own one because, unfortunately for me, they've become over time one of the most valuable cars on earth. But if I had, yeah, a dream garage with no limits, nothing holding me back, I would just have that. That's all I would need.
It's absolutely a magic wand question, so that's a perfect answer. We talked about the fact that as athletes, as racing drivers, we've had some really cool opportunities, right? Different experiences and conversations. You mentioned the conversation with Greg Moore being really neat. Other than that, who's the coolest person you've met, the coolest conversation outside of me, of course, that you've had that has really stuck with you as like, man, that was really neat. And why did it stick with you so much?
So that's such a tough one, man, because like you say, we've been so lucky to get to travel a bunch and meet a ton of people, and I know that I've definitely, been left with some very cool thoughts, feelings, and emotions from a lot of conversations, whether it's, I mean, I've had some conversations with mechanics that I've worked with CEOs of some of the companies that, sponsor motorsports, maybe that I've worked with directly or met at the track, some really fascinating people with cool backgrounds and how they built something incredible, which I always love hearing those stories. Um, and then you meet celebrities, whether it's other athletes. I've always been blown away by how humble somebody like Andrew Luck was, and I know he's a good friend of yours, but there was a time when he was the most famous person in Indianapolis, and every time I would see him, he would still introduce himself to me, not because he didn't remember me, because he was like worried that I might not remember him. He's like, "Oh, James, hi, Andrew, good to see you." I'm like, No, dude, I know. Like it's incredible. He's just such an incredible guy. And like one of the other ones that kind of stood out, and this sounds like a bit of a cop out answer because it's one of the bigger celebrities that I've met, but I had a really, really fascinating conversation with Lady Gaga when she came to the 500. She wasn't even supposed to be there. Her fiance at the time was a gearhead and wanted to be there, and she kind of just came along because he was going on a trip. And the way that she embraced the race and the questions that she was asking some phenomenal questions and was genuinely interested in it. And just seeing someone that's come from a completely different world take such an interest in what we do was really fascinating. So it's hard to narrow down, man. We've been, like you say, we've been very fortunate.
Well, absolutely. And I feel very fortunate to count you as a friend, as a competitor, as now a fellow broadcaster, and now a fellow podcaster. Who knew that was going to be a thing? But
Yeah,
appreciate the time. I told you I'd keep it to just under an hour. I'm going to hit that time mark as we wave the checkered flag on episode 2 of Speed Bumps. Really appreciate you being on, James. For our audience, please check out Off Track with Hinch and Rossi. Great insights into races, recaps of races, the news. Also, they talk a little bit about flying, a little bit about bourbon, lots of different conversations about lives within motorsports. Check them out. James, thank you again for the time, and we'll see you at the racetrack.
absolutely. But thanks so much for having me on.